There's nothing like a farmer's market to bring the best of a community together. And today we're visiting the growers behind a budding new market. You won't want to miss it, so stay tuned as we garden smart.
These moments of beauty and relaxation are brought to you by Proven Winners Flowering Shrubs. Our goal is to leave you free to just enjoy your garden. Proven Winners Flowering Shrubs can be found at local garden centers across the country.
Power Planter's garden drill augers are designed to help you tackle the digging jobs in your garden or yard. Dig through hard soil to assist in planting trees, shrubs, and annuals. Power Planter's heavy-duty augers, made for professional landscapers and home gardeners alike.
DRAM has been providing gardeners with professional equipment for over 80 years. DRAM products feature 9 water patterns and are designed to nurture your plants with a shower of rain. DRAM for lawn and garden, available at garden centers near you.
The Jaguar F-Pace.
The Village Green Market in Cashiers, North Carolina runs from April to October and features the bounty of the surrounding family farms. Today we're getting a behind-the-scenes look into a couple of them. The first farm is Truffle Hunter's Farm that is run by architect Jason Golden and his family. They're focused on organic produce, microgreens, and seasonal mushroom harvests. Jason is going to give us a look into what it's taken to get the farm up and running, as well as some growing tips for aspiring gardeners. Jason, thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Eric.
You have such a fascinating story, and I know that's been quite a journey moving from, just being an avid gardener, someone who's really, really passionate about vegetables and good food, to now this being your occupation. Tell us about that.
Well, we picked up this homestead in late 2019, and then 4 months later, the COVID world hit us.
Right.
And we began to say, what can we do to grow our own food? So our first year we started in mostly livestock. By the end of that summer we had harvested about 120 animals.
Wow.
And the next year we said, well, let's start growing. So we put this garden in place.
How large is your site? This is not a huge farm, right?
No, we're on about 2.5 acres. This is our effort to learn how to grow on scale. When you're growing for your family, you can plant some things and maybe you tend them and maybe you weed them. But when you're growing for the market, you got to be able to do it in a marketable way, that the product enters the market in an acceptable fashion.
What's your market for your product now?
We sell to a few restaurants, but our primary market is the farmers market in Cashiers and in Highlands.
I think that's something that's so cool about community agriculture and just keeping it close to the source. So your vegetables are not traveling very far at all, just right down the road.
That's right, 10 minutes to the Cashiers market and 20 minutes to the Highlands market.
Making the jump from being, just a small vegetable grower, I'm gonna have a few plots, I'm gonna grow this for my family, to scaling it up to something of this size, you start having to look at different types of tools, right?
We made a couple strategic purchases in our toolkit. We purchased the paper pot transplanter. We bought the Jang seeder, all in an effort to make it doable. The transplanter, I can plant one of these rows of 500 heads of lettuce in about 15 minutes.
Yeah, and that's important. That's part of being able to make that jump and scale up, is just realizing that the labor component changes radically. So Jason, of course, no vegetable is better than the soil that it's growing in. How important has that been for you?
Very much so. We made the decision to bring in certified organic compost. We made the purchase of about 13 tons of soil,
wow.
Which was a huge truckload. We laid down that soil in these rows on top of refrigerator boxes because we wanted to squash out the weeds so that we would have as weed-free of a garden as we could. And now what we're doing as we're growing, we're trying to create our own soil to replace the soil that we purchased, to start bringing economy into this.
Well, Jason, I know you've got a lot of cool stuff to show us. Let's go take a look at your microgreens. So Jason, microgreens are a very important component of what you're growing now, and I think it also is a very interesting type of agriculture that people at home can do on a small scale. So it's a neat way to get started with plants, but then also you've been able to scale it to where you're able to sell these to restaurants.
That's right. So we initially started microgreens because it was a quick turnaround. We wanted a product that we could grow for our family, that in 2 weeks we would have product. And then it was, how do we market this? They're so beautiful. Do we sell them live? Do we sell them cut? We are a live cell grower, which means we sell in soil for the customer to take home and enjoy fresh.
Talk to me about the cultivation. If I wanted to start growing microgreens at home, it's fairly straightforward, but what do I need to keep in mind?
You have to make some decisions on your grow medium. You have to make some decisions on where to grow. We grow indoors because it helps us control humidity and temperature. Gives us a sheltered place to grow in the shoulder seasons. Our substrate is the same soil that is brought in for our garden. It's certified organic compost. There are other choices, but we've chosen this because it helps people take it home live.
Let's talk about some of the crops that you're growing. There are certain ones that clearly work better for you than others.
We try to stay with the seeds that will finish out in about 2 weeks.
Okay.
So we have a 2-week cycle that we go through.
And so you're looking at growing like broccoli microgreens or small lettuces, arugula, things like that?
Yeah, so we have 2 varieties of pea. We have cantaloupe, which is a summer flavor, sunflower, radish, wheatgrass.
I want you to talk about this more automated system behind us. So in the same way that as you moved from a small vegetable garden into something large, and that meant there were certain tools that you needed to look at just to make it more feasible and more sustainable for yourself. With the microgreens, you've moved to something that's more automated.
This year we have started to transition a portion of our operation into flood trays. And those flood trays are filled by a pump that's on a timer. Every morning at about 8:30, it floods for 15 minutes, which is enough to wet the roots, and then it drains back down, and it gets me out of the watering process, which is a daily activity. And when you're growing 20 to 40 trays, that's a timely activity.
Right, and one thing about indoor cultivation is you're not worried about how much rainfall did that crop receive. So putting that on a timer is a very practical way to grow those crops because you have a lot of control over the water. The next thing we're going to talk about is very near and dear to my heart, which is mushrooms. And there's a tremendous amount of emerging interest just in that entire food category, not only because of how nutritional they are, but because of how delicious they are. And I know you've got some to show us. As a gardener, I think that mushrooms are one of the most exciting things that you can incorporate into what you're growing. Not only do they taste delicious, but it's a very important and natural part of breaking down cellulose material like this log and converting it into compost for future use. And it's actually pretty easy to do, right?
That's right. Our first year we put wine cap spawn into our wood chips and began to spread that around the property as our first mushroom cultivation on the property. They have yielded probably 50 pounds of mushrooms over the course of the last year.
So there's a number of different ways that we can approach growing mushrooms on our property as a gardener. Some of them are easier than others, some of them are faster than others. Kind of walk us through what our options are.
There are basically 3 ways to grow them. We can grow them in a log, and that's the long haul. We can inoculate them in this oak log here, and it'll be 18 months before we see the first fruiting of that. We can inoculate them in wood chips like we're standing on, and that's a little bit quicker. And the other option is sawdust.
Most of these materials, if not all of them, are easily available online, so you can select what kind of mushroom you want to grow, and then it's just a matter of impregnating this log with that spawn. It in time grows into the log, uses that as a food source, and then fruits out of the log. But show us how to do it.
This is a white oak. It's also recently harvested. You don't want to put your inoculation into an old log that you find on the forest floor.
Sure.
It's got to be relatively clean in terms of its fungal presence.
And not every tree is a good candidate for mushroom cultivation. Some of them, just due to the, tannin load in the wood or, just the structure of the wood, things that rot really, really fast, typically not good. Gymnosperms like pine, almost never good. And so oak is a great place to start because almost everything that we want to grow is going to like to grow in oak.
That's right.
Okay, so show us how we inoculate this log.
There's not too many tools that you need. You basically just need a drill with a 5/16 bit. You need a little bit of a layout. What I do is I take the diameter of the log, I divide it in segments by the diameter. So this is a 6-inch log. I've created 6 segments down here at the base. And then what I do is I space my dowels, and I've got a little marking here, every 6 inches on that line that's dictated down here. The next line, I shift it so I have a little bit more of a diamond pattern, and that's really so that the spawn that's going into that wood is spaced well. It's kind of like planting your garden. You want a little bit of a spacing between your plants.
And so from there, we're gonna drill the holes and then just hammer the dowel in there. And then we do have to protect the dowel so that it doesn't dry out. What do you like to use?
We use beeswax, but we have a local at the farmer's market that sells honey. And so he had some beeswax that we purchased from him.
You said this is, of course, the longest, but once we get this log done, it's gonna fruit season after season after season. How long until our first batch of mushrooms?
It should be about 18 months. You can trick the log into thinking it's the fruiting season, and the way you do that is you basically soak it in a water bath, immerse it in a water bath for 24, 48 hours, and then when you take it out, you smack it on a rock or something, you just shock it. And for whatever reason, the mushrooms say that's the time to go.
There you go. I guess they know what's best.
That's right.
Well, Jason, it's been so fascinating. Thank you so much for spending the day with us. I feel like we've learned so much from you.
I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you. Cut flowers are just a must in my house, and I can't imagine a more dynamic display than dahlias. Tim Wheatley at Mountain Diva Gardens has been growing dahlias for over 10 years and is a regular at the farmer's market. He's a wealth of knowledge and a super passionate grower. Tim, thank you so much for joining us. It's wonderful to see your garden.
Well, thank you for coming. I appreciate you being here.
Tim, ever since I was a kid, and I remember my first garden ever that my dad helped me build that was not a vegetable garden. The first plant was roses.
Yes.
The second plant was actually dahlias, and I've had a love affair with dahlias since I was probably 14, and understandably so. They are beautiful, vibrant, amazing plants. So I've always been fascinated with the range of colors that exist in that space. I've never done dahlias like you've done dahlias. I've always had a few, and this is on a whole nother scale.
Yeah.
And especially for someone who does it as it's basically like, well, it's more than a side project. So what got you into dahlias outside of just all the obvious reasons of their beauty?
About 12 years ago, I was at one of the big box stores, and I was walking through in the early part of spring, and I walked by one of the displays that they had of all the spring flowers and stuff, and there were like, I don't know, 10, 12 different types of dahlias. So I picked up a couple of the bags, and each one of them had 2 or 3 tubers in it. And so I was like, all right, I remember dahlias from when I was a kid, so I'm gonna give these a try. And so brought them home, planted them. Didn't know anything about staking, didn't know anything about tying them up and disbudding or any of the stuff that I do to them now. And so when you just plant a dahlia and you don't do anything with it, they just like to go on the ground and run, kind of like a tomato plant. And then they'll just put up buds. So you get these little short dahlias all across the ground. So that kind of started me back into, wow, I remember these from when I was a kid. So it was kind of like one of those nostalgic childhood memories. And I was like, I really like this. I think I'm going to try to grow more. And so that initial 12 has now turned into 1,400.
Wow. And so over time, you've gone from like smaller plots around the home, and then of course you've got a really nice piece of land here, super fertile soil right off a creek, and so pretty ideal place to grow them.
It is. They like a nice sandy, well-drained soil, so I've got a good place here where my yard has enough of a slope where everything kind of runs off, and so they seem to like it here. I do amend my soil though. I have compost brought in, and I put it into the soil every year because you're draining the nutrients out of them as you plant them every year. So I try to keep it nutrient rich so that they do continue to grow well, which they seem to be doing right now. But yeah, I mean, when I first started doing it, I didn't stake them the first year. The second year I started staking them and tying them up, which kind of became a pain because each one of them, as it grows, you've got to continue tying it and tying it and tying it. And so once I got over 100, I found this T-post trellis netting was the best way for me to do them because they grow up through the netting. I don't have to tie each individual plant, and so now they just kind of have themselves supported in the trellis. And
Well, Tim, let's take a walk through your dahlias, and I also want to talk to our viewers about just the cultivation of this amazing plant. Like most crops, if we know exactly what we're doing, they're pretty easy and carefree. And with dahlias, there's a few things that we do need to keep in mind if we want to have ours look as beautiful as yours. So let's start from the very beginning.
Okay.
Where do dahlias ideally like to grow?
Well, they ideally like a place where they get between 6 and 8 hours of sun. If you can get it morning sun, that's usually better, but they'll take whatever sun they can get. So the sun component is one of the big things. Well-drained soil.
Sure.
They don't like to have the roots stay overly wet, because if they do, they're going to start to rot.
When we plant our tubers, what time of year are we ideally looking at getting those in the ground?
Ideally, in this area, we do ours right after Mother's Day.
Okay.
Because that's after the last chance of frost has already passed. So different areas have different time frames. Georgia, you could probably plant them the end of April.
So what have you learned over your years of experience in achieving the maximum number of canes on the plant and then keeping them upright?
Well, one of the things is when the plant is about this high, and this is kind of the way it's going to look coming out of the ground, once it gets about this high, I'll take and open it up in the center, and I'll pop this center piece out and just discard that. So now the growth is not going to be so concentrated on going straight up. All these little side laterals are now where the energy is going to go. So now instead of having this straight up plant, I'm getting a bushy plant, which is going to give me more blooms going out.
Yeah, and as is true with any kind of pruning that we do, that meristematic bud right at the top, it sends hormones down below it to turn off the auxiliary buds on the side.
Right.
When we clip that out, all of a sudden there's nothing telling those buds to not grow.
Right.
And so then we can get a really nice dense bush. So let's talk about disbudding. And of course, your ultimate goal with these is the most ideal cut flower, and disbudding, it really helps channel the energy of the plant.
Correct. So when you're disbudding though, you're looking at the leaf shoots, and there's going to be little side buds that come up. And so I take those off so that the energy is going to this central bud instead of all these other side shoots. And I try to do it far enough down the plant so that I'm going to get a nice long stem on the plant, because when I cut it, nobody wants to have a plant with a 6-inch stem. So, I always want to have like a 12 to 18-inch stem. So if I disbud far enough down the plant, then I'm going to be able to cut it and have a nice long stem that's going to hold that nice bloom.
So let's talk about disease and insect pressure. Are there things that we need to keep an eye out for? Are these fairly chemically intensive to grow, or not so much?
Well, one of the big problems that I have encountered this year as far as insects, and this was early on in the spring, and I had a lot of wireworms.
Okay.
And wireworms are the larvae of the click beetle, and wireworms love to eat anything tuberous. The other problems that I usually have as far as insects are Japanese beetles and caterpillars, which are always, constant things here in the South. I try to spray them every couple of weeks just to keep those down.
Let's talk about their water needs. Of course, you get quite a bit of rainfall here, but this is a plant that it does like to stay on the moist side for sure.
Yeah, well, whenever they're first planted, they don't like to have a whole lot of water.
Okay.
The tuber itself has stored enough energy over the winter time to get the plant started. So it doesn't like to have a whole lot of moisture on that tuber when it first starts. Once the roots system starts to develop, then you can start watering it. Mother Nature takes care of it most of the time.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of tubers, Tim, I know that you've got some that you can show us. So
yes.
Let's go take a look at the tubers and then talk about the propagation of dahlias.
Okay.
So Tim, as you mentioned, dahlias are a tuberous plant in the same way that irises and daylilies and many other of our favorite plants are.
Right.
And so the tuber is one of the most common ways that these plants are propagated is by dividing the tuber. And I'd love for us to show you this plant that you've excavated. Kind of talk us through how we would divide the tubers on a dahlia.
All right. Well, the first thing that I would do when I'm digging them in the fall is I would get rid of all this top stuff. And then all of these little side roots that are on here just get trimmed away because they're not really productive for any particular purpose. And then this one tuber here has got a label on it, so that would be the mother tuber, which is what this plant started from. So that tuber has pretty much already used up all of its energy from this year producing this plant. So that one is not really anything that's viable. So I'm not going to keep that one for next year.
Okay.
So the rest of them on here, I'm going to try to keep part of the stem on all of them because that's where it's going to be able to develop its eye from. I'm going to get rid of all the useless stuff on here. So if you just kind of look at this, you can see where it's got little bumps on it, and so that's probably where an eye is going to develop. And sometimes I'll just keep a whole little clump like this, just because sometimes I can't always see exactly where the eyes are going to be.
Right.
And then as it starts to eye up in the early part of the spring, then I can divide it a little more readily. But I'll keep those, I'll let them dry out for about 48 hours, and then once they've dried, I have my little storage boxes with vermiculite in them. And I usually put a little bit of cinnamon in my vermiculite, and
Okay.
that's like an antifungal, so it helps to keep funguses and stuff from growing on the tubers while they're in storage.
Fascinating.
So I'll just stick those down in there, put my label in there. I've bored some holes in the top of this so that they can continue to get some airflow while they're in storage. That way it's not just stale, stagnant air in there. And then I label the outside of the box with what the variety is and the size, and then I keep them all organized by size and alphabetically by the name of the variety.
Okay, so once we've excavated the tuber and we have it stored in its container, what kind of conditions do we need to keep it in?
Well, it needs to be in a cool, dark spot. I just have a small cabin that I keep a little radiant heater on them, and I make sure that it stays above 32 degrees because I don't want them to get below freezing, because if they
Right.
freeze, then the tuber is going to just turn to mush.
Last but not least is the harvesting aspect of our cut flowers.
Right.
And, of course, we all cut flowers from our garden and bring them inside.
Yes.
But these are going to market, so there's a few things that we ought to think about just to make sure that they arrive in the best condition. And I'd love for you to talk us through all that, Tim.
Okay, well, the first thing whenever I'm gathering is I'm always looking to make sure that I've got a stem that's going to have some life left to it. So I always want to have a nice long stem on one, and once I take this and put it in a 5-gallon bucket, it's going to stand above the rim of the bucket. So I always make sure that I've got that nice long stem, and the stems are hollow. When I get through harvesting and I've got them all in my buckets, then I'll add hot water, as hot as I can get it
Really?
out of my tap. The steam from that hot water is going to go up into that stem, and it's just going to make sure that that stem opens up so that the actual flower is going to be able to get the nutrients and the water that it needs in order to survive in a vase.
So how long does a cut flower last typically once you put it in a vase?
Once it's been cut, you'll typically get about a week out of them. Some varieties that are more tightly petaled will last a little bit longer. The looser ones like this, typically about a week is what you'll get out of them.
Well, Tim, thank you so much for spending the day with us. I've learned so much about dahlias, and now I'm re-energized to get more dahlias in my garden. Thank you.
Yeah.
Each week we travel the country north to south, east to west, visiting some of the most exciting gardens, as well as talking to industry horticulturalists about design principles, new plants, and also how you can be most successful with your home gardens. We also love answering your gardening questions, so visit us on the web at GardenSMART.com.
These moments of beauty and relaxation are brought to you by Proven Winners Flowering Shrubs. Our goal is to leave you free to just enjoy your garden. Proven Winners Flowering Shrubs can be found at local garden centers across the country.
Power Planter's garden drill augers are designed to help you tackle the digging jobs in your garden or yard. Dig through hard soil to assist in planting trees, shrubs, and annuals. Power Planter's heavy-duty augers, made for professional landscapers and home gardeners alike.
DRAM has been providing gardeners with professional equipment for over 80 years. DRAM products feature 9 water patterns and are designed to nurture your plants with a shower of rain. DRAM for lawn and garden, available at garden centers near you.
The Jaguar F-Pace.
What an action-packed day. There's so much that goes into growing great products for market, and so much satisfaction that these farmers feel when they put amazing produce into the hands of their community. If you have questions about anything you've seen today, visit us on the web at GardenSMART.com. You can also find free gardening tips on GardenSMART TV on YouTube. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. We look forward to seeing you next week as we garden smart.